And, okay, hi guys. So I just want to thank you all again for coming out and now explain a little bit about why you're here. So I've been organizing for the last 8 years. I got into this watching the towers crash and realizing that George W. Bush was our president at that point. So I got really involved at that juncture and was especially concerned about young voters. So by 2004, I went out and I ran the young voter turnout operation in Ohio, which was successful despite the overall outcome. But what I started to see, it was really interesting there. We went after young voters like people had never gone after them before. Before it was always kind of register and forget. If young people are registered, they'll vote Democrat, right? But it doesn't really work like that. What we were able to do is we were able to send out crews of both volunteers and paid workers into the community. We sent them to clubs, bars, bus stops where there's any sort of concentration of young voters, and really started to engage in a dialogue and a discussion. And we also worked hard to protect their right to vote. Like a lot of horrible states, New York included, there's a 30-day registration requirement. What that does is it de facto excludes young people, low-income people, anybody who's at all transient starts to get hit by this system. So through technology, we were able to actually identify ahead of time those voters who were going to be subjected to this. And they gave us their cell phone numbers. They talked to us in the club because we were their peers. And then we were able to call them back, like 10,000 of them, and let them know that their vote was at jeopardy on the most important election of their lifetimes at that point. And the response was overwhelming. I mean, we actually, by going face-to-face, by engaging the community, by having a dialogue, we increased turnout 33%. Right? So that was out of 150,000 voters, we added 50,000 voters to a race that was decided by 110,000. The Democrats didn't care. I got all of $160,000 to do this, where I think 20 million were poured into the states. But what I started to understand is there's power in these demographics that are ignored. Now what happens in New York State on a regular basis, unfortunately, is a lot of corruption and dysfunction, but very few people are participating. Turnout rates in our primaries are 10%. So Sheldon Silver, who's the most powerful man in New York, who killed congestion pricing, who got rid of the commuter taxes, cost New York billions and billions of dollars of revenue, won with all of 6,000 votes when Paul Newell, when I managed Paul Newell's campaign against him in 2008. And so what I started to see there was the kind of activity that we did in Ohio could have a massive, massive impact here in New York, right? And so the hope is to start this cycle right now. There's a guy named Pedro Espada. He exemplifies what the New York State legislature is and how bad it can be. The guy's allegedly channeled $14 million through a nonprofit that he set up as his political machine to family members, right? Every cousin, not everyone, it's totally factual, but you look at the payroll at Soundview, the community health center that he started, and there's a lot of Espadas or Espada relatives on there, right? So this is what these guys do. They pick a small portion of the population, they hook them up through patronage, or they only cultivate these very, very small portions, and then the rest of us are left out. And that suppresses turnout, and it's how they like it, and they go decades and decades without being challenged. And while that happens, we lose $380 million of federal transportation funding for congestion pricing. While that happens, the state doesn't contribute anywhere near its portion towards public housing. And New York State has to carry the burden of the entire state because you have these state legislators who are more interested in their personal fiefdom than what's going on here. So we're endorsing Gustavo Rivera, who's a young guy, and he's running against Pedro Espada. And we're hoping that he can send a message to Albany that this kind of corruption and extortion isn't acceptable. Part of that, what we want to do is work with the campaign to figure out where are the groups that we can turn out. Right? Where are the voters that us talking to them is statistically proven to increase their chance of turning out by 20%. The regression analysis for my program yielded 33%. I mean, this is a real difference. That means 1 out of every 5 people, hopefully you'll speak to with us, will turn out to vote. And these numbers start to really matter. So hopefully a spot will get knocked out. And then we've got Shirley Huntley down in Queens. And she's one of the only, there's 3 New York State, don't quote me on this, but New York State senators who voted down gay marriage, right? She's the only one facing a credible challenge at this point, and she's down in Queens. And another young candidate who we're endorsing as well, Lynn Nunes, is running against her. Again, these are going to be very low turnout races where appealing to groups of folks who aren't normally involved can have a great impact. So, this is it. I worked on the national level, I worked on presidentials, I worked on congressionals, and I saw that our system is deeply screwed and deeply flawed at every level, and that the most